The cold wind cut through the air like invisible razors, seeping under the makeshift canvas that Autumn and her family used as shelter beneath the viaduct. The precarious protection, made of a piece of plastic attached to a fence and some stacked cardboard boxes, barely kept away the evening dew that was beginning to fall on that grey afternoon. Autumn, with her small 7 years, tangled dark hair and large eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older, watched the twin brothers who slept on a thin blanket spread on the concrete floor, wrapped in donated pieces of fabric. Her trembling little hands constantly adjusted the cloth over the babies, while her throat burned with a cough she tried to suppress so as not to wake them. "You need to stay warm, yes? Mommy will be back soon and will bring food for all of us." She promised she wouldn't be long this time. The sky was beginning to darken earlier than normal, a harbinger of the storm that was forming. Autumn felt a shiver run through her frail body. The fever that had begun as a slight discomfort in the morning now made her body burn inside, contrasting with the damp cold of the environment. Her heavy eyes struggled to stay open as she watched over the twins. She couldn't sleep, not when she was alone with them. Emily, her mother, had left hours earlier to try to get some money or food in the busy streets of downtown, as she had done every day since they lost everything. "Just a little longer, I just need to hold on a little longer. When Mommy comes back, I can rest. I have to be strong like she always says." One of the babies began to whimper, his little red face contracting in a cry that would soon become more intense. Autumn dragged herself to him, ignoring the dizziness that made the world spin around her. Gently, she took the little one in her arms, rocking him as she had seen her mother do so many times. Despite her young age, Autumn had learned to care for her brothers. It was what she could do to help her mother, who had been trying to keep them in any way she could since their father abandoned them. There was no option in her world. Either she grew up quickly and took on responsibilities, or they would all suffer even more. Her small hands caressed the baby's head, feeling the warmth emanating from him. Would he have a fever too? "Don't cry, little one. Everything's okay, Autumn is here." The sound of the rain beginning to fall mingled with the baby's cry, creating a symphony of despair that Autumn tried to calm with her childish voice. The other twin, as if understanding his brother's distress, also began his lament. Now there were 2 babies crying, while Autumn tried to divide them in her arms that were too small for such responsibility. A strong cough shook her body, making her almost drop one of the babies. Silent tears ran down her cheeks flushed with fever, but she couldn't afford the luxury of breaking down. Not now. "Calm down, please, calm down. I know you're hungry, I am too. Mommy will bring something, she always does. She would never leave us without food, you know that." A thunder cut across the sky, momentarily illuminating the darkness under the viaduct. Autumn cowered, fear mixing with the physical pain she felt. The babies cried louder, frightened by the sudden noise. She looked toward the opening of the makeshift shelter, expecting to see her mother's silhouette at any moment. But time passed, and Emily did not return. The last bottle prepared hours earlier with water from a public tap, and the little remaining powdered milk was gone, and the twins were starving. Autumn knew her mother would never take so long without a good reason. "Where are you, Mommy? The babies are hungry and I don't know what else to do. You said you'd be back before the rain, remember?" The rain intensified with each minute, transforming into a fierce storm. Water began to run down from the viaduct, invading the small space where they sheltered. Autumn pulled the blanket with the babies to the corner that still seemed dry. Her head throbbed, and the cough became more frequent. She looked at the small wristwatch her mother had given her, the only valuable object they still possessed, found in the trash and fixed by a kind man, and saw that it was already past 6 in the evening. Emily never stayed out until so late, especially with the threat of a storm. "Something happened to her, I know something happened. Mommy would never leave us alone for so long, not with the rain coming. What if she needs help?" A noise made Autumn stand up, hopeful. It was Emily, soaked from the rain, holding a plastic bag against her chest. Autumn ran outside, ignoring the heavy drops falling on her to help her mother. When she got closer, she noticed that Emily was in an alarming state. Her face, normally already pale from the hard life, now had an almost grey coloration. Her lips were purple, and she was shaking violently. "Autumn, my child, I got milk for the babies." Autumn took the bag and helped her mother. Emily could barely stand, leaning on her daughter in a way she had never done before. When they reached the blanket on the floor, Emily collapsed, breathing with difficulty. Her eyes, identical to Autumn's, were dull and distant. The girl felt a fear like never before. She placed her hand on her mother's forehead and immediately withdrew it, frightened by the heat emanating from her. "Mom, you're burning with fever. You need to take off these wet clothes. It will make things worse. Let me help you." Emily tried to answer, but only a weak moan escaped her lips. Autumn, despite her own discomfort, began to remove her mother's soaked clothes, replacing them with dry pieces she found in the small bag of belongings they kept. All the while the babies cried, hungry and frightened. The girl divided herself between caring for her mother and preparing milk for her siblings. With trembling hands, she managed to mix the powdered milk with water from a saved bottle, doing the best she could to feed the twins. "Everything will be all right, Mum. You just need to rest a bit. I'll take care of everything. Don't worry. I have already given milk to the babies, see? They're calmer now." Emily's breathing became more difficult with each minute. Her chest rose and fell in an irregular rhythm, and a frightening wheeze accompanied each inhalation. Autumn had never seen her mother so sick. She tried to make her drink water, but Emily could barely swallow. The fever seemed to consume her strength rapidly. Autumn wet a piece of cloth with water from the bottle and placed it on her mother's forehead, as Emily used to do when she got sick. "You'll get better soon, Mommy. It's just a fever. It will pass. Tomorrow you'll be better. I know you will." The hours passed, and Emily's condition only worsened. The rain continued to fall mercilessly, and water began to invade more and more of their small space. Autumn fought against her own fever to stay alert. With each passing minute, her certainty grew that they needed urgent help. Emily's cough now came with breathing so difficult that it seemed each breath might be her last. In a moment of lucidity, Emily opened her eyes and fixed them on Autumn. "Daughter, listen. You need to get help. I can't breathe properly or even get up. I need you to be strong. The babies. Take care of them. I love you, my love. I love all of you." Autumn felt panic growing inside her. Leaving the shelter meant exposing everyone to the storm. But staying could be even worse. Her own cough was getting stronger, and the babies seemed restless, one of them with skin hot to the touch, possibly with fever as well. She looked at her mother, whose eyes were now closed again, her body shaken by tremors. "Help! Where will I find help at this hour in this rain? And how do I take the babies with me? I can't leave them here with you like this." A particularly strong thunder shook the air, and Autumn noticed that water was already beginning to reach where her mother was lying. They couldn't stay there. Her mother needed a doctor urgently, and she herself felt that she couldn't hold on much longer. With determination that didn't match her age, she began to gather what they would need. She found a plastic bag large enough to put the babies in, and some clean cloths they used as diapers. "Don't worry, Mum. I'll get help and come back with someone to get you. I promise I'll take care of the babies. I won't let anything bad happen to them." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes remained closed, and only the weak movement of her chest indicated she was still breathing. Autumn felt a knot in her throat, but she swallowed her tears. She had to be strong now. She put the twins in the bag, wrapping them in pieces of fabric to protect them from the rain. She took an old torn beanie that someone had donated and put it on her own head, knowing it would be insufficient against the storm. Before leaving, she knelt beside her mother and kissed her hot forehead. "I'll be back soon, Mom. Hold on, please. I need you. We all need you." The storm was even worse than it had seemed from inside the shelter under the viaduct. The rain fell in dense curtains, making visibility difficult. Autumn pressed the bag against her chest, trying to protect the babies as much as possible. Her trembling legs took her to the main street, where she hoped to find someone who could help. But the streets were deserted, everyone sheltered from the storm. Even so, she continued walking, determined not to return without help. "Everything will be all right, little ones. We'll find someone good who can help our mother. You'll see. Tomorrow we'll all be together again and Mommy will be well." Each step was an immense effort. The fever made her vision blur, and the cough constantly stopped her, forcing her to lean against building walls to avoid falling. The babies cried, bothered by the rain that occasionally hit their little faces. Autumn headed toward the city center, where she knew there was a hospital. It was far, perhaps too far for her current strength, but she saw no other option. Just a little more, just a few more streets. I know you're cold and hungry, but we need to continue. We can't go back without help for Mommy. The downtown streets began to appear, more illuminated despite the storm. Autumn felt brief relief seeing car lights passing, people running for shelter. Someone would help her, they had to help. She tried to call out, but her voice was too weak to be heard over the noise of the rain. Her steps took her to the central square, an open space where normally there would be many people, even at night. But the storm had driven most away. Only a few cars passed quickly, their drivers completely oblivious to the small, staggering figure carrying 2 babies. Please, someone help me. My mother is very sick, she needs a doctor. A new coughing fit made her stop in the middle of the square. Autumn felt her legs weaken. The bag with the babies weighed on her tired arms. Her vision darkened at the edges, and a strange buzzing filled her ears. She fought to stay standing, to continue, but her small body had reached its limit. She thought of her mother alone under the viaduct, perhaps dying with no one to help her. She thought of the babies who depended on her to survive. She tried to take another step but couldn't. I'm sorry, Mommy, I tried. I swear I tried. The world spun around Autumn, the streetlight lights becoming golden blurs in her vision. She felt her knees touch the wet ground of the square, the bag with the baby still firmly clutched against her chest. Even in that moment, her protective instinct didn't abandon her. With one last effort, she positioned the bag so the babies wouldn't fall when she could no longer hold them. The twins' crying was now the only thing she heard, drowning out the noise of the rain. Someone will find us. Someone good will help us, my kiss, they have to help. Autumn's eyelids became too heavy to keep open. Her body, overcome by illness and exhaustion, gave in completely. She fell sideways onto the square's ground, the merciless rain washing her feverish face. Beside her, protected as best she could in the improvised bag, the twins cried desperately, their wails echoing through the empty square. Autumn no longer heard them. Darkness enveloped her, taking away the pain, cold and fear. Her last conscious thought was a silent prayer that someone would find the babies in time. Please, someone, help. Dear God, please help my family, the girl implored in prayer. And so, unconscious under the merciless storm, Autumn lay motionless in the central square, while the babies' crying mingled with the sound of rain, a desperate appeal awaiting response amid the stormy night. The night embraced the central square with its damp darkness, while the storm poured water mercilessly over the sleeping city. Andrew Mitchell observed the urban landscape through the window of his luxury car, his face marked by the fatigue of another day spent by his son's hospital bed. Drops ran down the tinted glass, distorting the streetlight lights into golden blurs, like tears from a sky that shared his silent pain. The driver slowly moved along the deserted avenue, circling the square to reach the mansion on the city outskirts, when Andrew noticed something unusual. A small figure in the middle of the square, motionless under the torrential rain. Stop the car now, there's someone fallen there in the square. Looks like a child. The sudden brake projected Andrew slightly forward, but his hand was already on the door handle before the vehicle completely stopped. Ignoring the rain that immediately soaked his Italian suit, he ran toward the fallen figure. What he saw squeezed his heart in a way he hadn't felt since his son's accident. A girl, no more than a child, unconscious on the wet pavement. Even more alarming beside her, an improvised bag from which came sharp cries, babies, 2 of them, precariously protected from the merciless rain. My God, they're children. How can they be here alone in this storm? Andrew didn't hesitate. He removed his coat and carefully covered the girl, noticing her warm skin despite the cold rain. High fever, no doubt. He shouted to the driver, who was already approaching with an umbrella, and together, with gentleness, they lifted the little one. The babies appeared newborn, their little faces red from crying so much. The situation was an absolute emergency. With the girl in his arms and the driver carrying the bag with the twins, they quickly returned to the car. Central Hospital, quickly. Call the doctor and tell him we're coming with an emergency. A child and 2 babies in critical condition. The luxurious vehicle cut through the deserted streets on its way to the private hospital, where Andrew's son was hospitalized. In the back seat, the businessman held the girl in his arms, trying to warm her. His angular face, normally composed and controlled during the most difficult negotiations, now reflected genuine concern. He observed the little one's face, her delicate features contracted in an uneasy sleep, and something stirred within him. A distant memory, perhaps, of his own daughter he never got to know, lost along with his wife in a complicated childbirth years ago. "Hang on, little one. You're going to be fine, I promise. I won't let anything happen to you or these babies." The hospital appeared in the rainy landscape, its white lights a beacon of hope in the gloomy night. The medical team, alerted by the phone call, was waiting at the emergency entrance. Andrew jumped out of the car with the girl in his arms, while the driver brought the babies. The clinical efficiency of the place immediately went into action. Stretchers were brought, the girl and babies were placed under care, and in seconds they were being taken inside. Andrew followed along, his status as a benefactor of the hospital opening all doors, his imposing presence brushing aside any questioning. "I want the best specialists. Don't economize on anything. These children need the best care this hospital can offer." The doctors worked frantically. The girl, placed on a stretcher, was quickly connected to monitors and given an oxygen mask. The babies were taken to the neonatal ward, where experienced nurses examined, cleaned, and warmed them. Andrew observed everything from the corridor, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline, his soaked suit forgotten as he followed the movement of the team. One of the doctors, after an initial examination, approached him with a grave expression, clipboard in hand and a concerned look behind his glasses. "Mr. Mitchell, the situation is critical. The girl has severe pneumonia, probably aggravated by prolonged exposure, malnutrition, and exhaustion. The babies are dehydrated but more stable." Andrew felt a pang of pain upon hearing the diagnosis. Children abandoned to their own fate, struggling to survive in inhumane conditions. It was a reality he knew through statistics, through the social projects he funded, but which now materialized in a raw form before his eyes. He ran his hand through the grey hair at his temples, a gesture of anguish he rarely allowed himself to show. The irony didn't escape him. He, with all his money, couldn't bring his son back from a coma, while these children, with nothing, fought desperately for a chance at life. "Do everything necessary. I want constant reports on their condition. Any identification, any clue about who they are or where they came from." A movement on the stretcher caught everyone's attention. The girl briefly regained consciousness, her large, frightened eyes trying to focus on the unfamiliar environment around her. Her breathing was laborious even with the help of oxygen, and her dry lips moved, trying to form words. Andrew quickly approached, leaning in to hear what she was trying to say. Her voice was just a whisper, broken by difficult breathing and coughing. "My mother. Please help my mother. She's sick. Under the viaduct on the main avenue." "Please." The words came out with visible effort, each syllable costing precious energy that the girl clearly couldn't spare. Her eyes, feverish but determined, fixed on Andrew's for a brief moment before closing again, overcome by exhaustion. The doctor immediately adjusted the oxygen flow and signaled to the nurse who administered medication into the IV. The child had returned to unconsciousness, but had left crucial information. "She has a mother. We need to find her right now." Andrew wasted no time. He called his driver and his personal assistant by phone, mobilizing a small search team. He gave instructions based on the girl's confused words. The viaduct on the main avenue, probably one of the known locations where homeless people sought shelter. Meanwhile, he turned his attention to the doctors, who were now discussing the case with increasingly grim expressions. One of them, apparently the pulmonology specialist, was shaking his head while examining the first test results. "Her chances aren't good. The lung involvement is extensive, and there are signs that the infection may be spreading to the bloodstream. We need aggressive intervention." Time seemed to stretch like a taut elastic as Andrew waited in the hospital corridor. The babies, now clean, fed, and warmed, had been placed in proper cribs, with monitors checking their vital functions. They were responding well to care, their tiny faces now peaceful in sleep. The girl, however, had been taken for more intensive procedures, and her condition seemed to deteriorate with each hour. Andrew paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to observe the twins through the glass. Something about those helpless children had touched a part of his heart that he thought had died since the tragedy with his family and his son's accident. How can such a small child endure so much, taking care of babies sick on the street, while we're in our comfortable homes, complaining about trivial problems? Andrew's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his driver with news of the search. They had found an unconscious woman under the viaduct, exactly where the girl had indicated. Her condition was extremely serious, very high fever, barely perceptible breathing, weak pulse. The hospital ambulance was already on its way at Andrew's request. He hung up the phone with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had found the mother, but from the report, perhaps too late. At least now we know the girl wasn't delirious. Her mother really is there needing help. I hope there's still time. Less than 30 minutes later, the emergency doors opened to receive a new patient. Andrew observed from a distance the arrival of the woman, a fragile and worn figure on the stretcher, almost disappearing under the blankets and medical equipment. The same doctors who were attending to the girl were called, and soon they were examining the newcomer with the same grave expression. The resemblance between mother and daughter was evident, even with both in critical condition. The same delicate features, the same dark hair, now tangled and dirty. It's pneumonia too, and in a very advanced state, probably what the daughter has. We need an ICU bed immediately. The word ICU made Andrew shudder. He knew that place well, spent hours there every day beside his comatose son. He knew that an ICU bed meant critical condition, life hanging by a thread. Now mother and daughter needed this precious resource, and he was fully aware that even in a first-rate private hospital, intensive care beds were limited. He approached the chief physician, his expression making clear his willingness to do whatever necessary. If you need to transfer someone to another hospital to open beds, do it. I'll cover all costs. These people are my responsibility now. The following hours passed in a blur of intense activity. Autumn, as Andrew finally discovered was the girl's name after finding a handmade bracelet with the name engraved on her wrist, was taken to the pediatric ICU. Her mother, Emily, identified by documents kept in a small plastic bag protected inside her clothes, was admitted to the adult ICU. Doctors ran between the two units, consulting with each other, adjusting treatments, trying to stabilize two lives that were rapidly fading. The situation is complicated. Both need all our attention and resources, but we are a limited team. In cases like this, we have to make difficult choices. Andrew was sitting in a chair in the corridor between the two rooms, observing the comings and goings of the professionals. He had exchanged his wetsuit for sterilized hospital clothes and held a cup of coffee that had already cooled without him taking a single sip. His assistant had been tasked with caring for the twins, ensuring they received all necessary care. Meanwhile, Andrew found himself divided between 3 hospital beds, his sons, the girls, and the mothers. 3 lives suspended on a thin thread, 3 destinies now intertwined with his own. How can I help more? There must be something I can do besides paying the bills. These people entered my life for a reason. One of the doctors left the children's unit with a concerned expression. Andrew stood up immediately, preparing himself for bad news. The doctor, however, wasn't bringing a final sentence but an ethical and practical dilemma. The team was divided between the 2 patients, and resources, not financial but human, were being stretched to the limit. Autumn needed a specialized procedure urgently, but that would mean relocating part of the team attending to Emily, potentially compromising her already reduced chances. Mr. Mitchell, I hate to put you in this position, but we need your guidance. You brought them in, you're covering the costs. Who should we focus our most intensive efforts on at this critical moment? The question fell like a weight on Andrew's shoulders. How could he decide between the life of an innocent child and the mother who had so desperately tried to save her? What right did he have to make such a choice? His gaze wandered from the doctor to the ICU doors, imagining the 2 fragile figures fighting for each breath. He thought of his own son, in a coma for months, and how devastated he would be if someone had to choose between saving him or himself. He took a deep breath, searching within himself for the wisdom to make an impossible decision. I will not make this choice. Bring more doctors, hire specialists from other hospitals if necessary. Pay whatever it takes. But don't ask me to choose who lives and who dies." The determination in Andrew's voice surprised the doctor. It wasn't the answer he expected, but he respected it. With a nod, he walked away to make calls, mobilize resources, seek alternatives. Andrew sat back down, now with the weight of anguish multiplied. He looked at his watch, almost dawn. The storm outside had diminished, but the one forming within these white aseptic walls was only growing in intensity. If there is any greater force in this universe, may it protect us all now. These people have suffered too much already. The corridor began to gain more movement with the morning shift change. Fresh nurses and doctors arrived, receiving reports of the tumultuous night. Andrew remained at his post, refusing to go home to rest. He had called his son's room, asking the private nurse accompanying him to give updates every hour. Ethan remained stable in his deep sleep, oblivious to the drama unfolding just a few rooms away. "I've been waiting so long for you to come back, my son. Now suddenly I'm waiting for 2 more lives. How strange fate is in its designs." The hospital director arrived personally, alerted by the unusual situation. He spoke briefly with Andrew, ensuring that all possible resources were being mobilized. More specialists had been called, additional equipment was on the way. Andrew's influence and financial resources opened doors that would normally remain closed to people in Autumn and Emily's situation. The businessman thanked him with a silent nod, his mind still occupied with the extraordinary events of the past few hours. "Do whatever is in your power, Doctor. These people are important to me, even if I don't yet fully understand why." The pediatric ICU doors suddenly opened. A team of doctors rushed in with equipment, tense voices giving rapid orders. Andrew jumped up, his heart racing. Something was happening with Autumn. He tried to peek inside as the door swung, catching glimpses of the small figure in the bed, now surrounded by professionals working frantically. One of the monitors emitted a sharp and insistent alarm. Her heart was failing. "No, Autumn, don't give up now. You've come this far, been so brave, you can't leave like this." Almost simultaneously, a similar commotion began in the adult ICU. Andrew looked from one door to the other, feeling completely helpless. Mother and daughter in separate rooms, fighting the same battle against death, their weakened bodies finally giving in after so much effort. The doctors had been clear. Both were severely compromised, their organisms exhausted by disease, hunger, cold. Pneumonia had found fertile ground in bodies already fragile from hard life on the streets. How can there be so much injustice in the world? A child and her mother innocent, paying such a high price just for being poor. Time seemed frozen as Andrew waited for news. Any news. The medical teams continued their urgent work, now invisible behind closed doors. The sounds of equipment and tense voices were the only indication of the drama unfolding inside those rooms. The first rays of sunlight penetrated through the corridor windows, cruelly contrasting with the darkness of the moment. Andrew felt the weight of a sleepless night, but refused to yield to fatigue. What bitter irony it would be if I brought them here only to see them depart. I cannot accept that, I simply cannot. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, one of the doctors emerged from the pediatric unit. His face reflected exhaustion, but there was something more, a faint glimpse of hope. He approached Andrew, removing his surgical mask, revealing a slight smile of relief. In his hands, he held a clipboard with the girl's vital signs, now stabilized after the crisis. "We managed to bring her back, Mr. Mitchell. Autumn is an incredible fighter. She's not out of danger yet, but she responded to the emergency treatment. Now we need to see how her mother is responding." While Andrew absorbed that first piece of good news, the doors of the other ICU also opened. A second doctor appeared, this one with a more serious expression, though not entirely defeated. Emily had survived the crisis too, but her condition was even more delicate than her daughter's. Her body, already weakened for a longer time and with fewer reserves than the child's, was struggling much more difficultly. The next moments would be crucial for both, but especially for the mother. "We need more specialists for Emily. Her condition is extremely severe. Without intensive intervention in the next few hours, I don't know if we can keep her alive." Andrew absorbed the information like a physical blow. All his resources, all his money and influence might not be enough in the face of the fragility of a human life, so mistreated by fate. He looked at the exhausted doctors before him, those who had just accomplished what seemed impossible, bringing two people back from the brink of death. And then, he made another decision that would forever change the course of those intertwined lives. Bring the specialists you need, not just from this country, but from wherever necessary. Use my private jet if needed. These people will not die today, not if I can help it, he ordered, and that's what they did. Morning arrived gently at the hospital, bringing with it a silence different from that of the anguishing night. It was no longer the silence of despair, but that of exhaustion after battle. 3 days had passed since Andrew Mitchell had found Autumn and the twins in the square. 3 days of constant vigil, of tireless doctors fighting to keep mother and daughter breathing. The specialists brought in urgently, some even from abroad, had worked without rest, applying advanced protocols, cutting-edge medications, and all the technology money could buy. And now, finally, a fragile stability had set in. Emily and Autumn had overcome the most critical phase, although the path to complete recovery was still long and uncertain. They will survive, Mr. Mitchell. I still can't guarantee the absence of sequelae, especially in the mother, but we've managed to stabilize them. It was by a very narrow margin. Andrew observed Autumn through the glass of the pediatric unit, her small and fragile body surrounded by medical equipment that seemed to swallow her. The fever had subsided, but the pneumonia had left severe marks on her still developing lungs. The girl slept most of the time, waking only in brief moments of confused consciousness. Emily, on another floor, also slept induced by medications, her adult body having suffered even more from prolonged illness and chronic malnutrition. The twins, on the other hand, completely recovered, were under the care of the nursing staff in the neonatal area, gaining weight and color each day. She's the same age Ethan was when he started learning piano, so small to face so much pain. A week passed, and Autumn was finally transferred to a private room. She still needed supplemental oxygen and constant medication, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic. Andrew had ordered the room to be prepared with all possible comfort, walls painted in soft tones, colorful curtains, even a small sound system that played children's music at a low volume. He visited 3 times a day, in the morning before going to Ethan's room, in the afternoon after lunch, and at night before returning to the empty mansion. He couldn't explain the connection he felt with that unknown family, but something about them had awakened a part of his humanity that he thought had been lost in the cold corridors of that same hospital. You don't need to do all this for us. You've already done too much by saving us that night. It was the first time Autumn had been able to maintain a coherent conversation, her voice still weak, but her eyes regaining the sparkle of life. Andrew sat beside her bed, gently adjusting the pillow under her head. The girl observed him with curiosity and a gratitude that transcended words. She had asked about her brothers as soon as she regained consciousness, and Andrew had personally ensured that she could see them, having the nurses bring the babies for regular visits. Now they were in the room, sleeping in specially installed cribs. I did nothing more than what any person would do. You're the one who deserves admiration, Autumn, taking care of your brothers alone, seeking help even while being so sick. You are extraordinary. The days turned into 2 weeks, and the routine established itself with surprising naturalness. I'll translate the text to English while keeping the original formatting and style. Autumn was gradually regaining her strength, now able to sit up in bed without help, and even take a few steps supported by the physiotherapist. Emily was also showing improvement, albeit more slowly. She had fully awakened and, after the initial confusion, understood the incredible sequence of events that had saved her family. The gratitude in her eyes when Andrew first entered her room was so intense that words became superfluous. She cried silently, holding the businessman's hand between her own, still fragile and trembling. I will never be able to repay what you did for us, Mr. Mitchell. You saved my children when I couldn't protect them. It was during one of these visits that Andrew finally shared his own story. Sitting between the beds of Autumn and Emily, who now shared the same spacious room to be together, he spoke about Ethan, his only son, who had been in a coma for 8 months after a serious car accident. He told them about the wife he had lost years before, about the mansion too large for a man alone, about sleepless nights wondering if his son would ever wake up. His voice, normally firm and controlled, trembled slightly as he revealed his own vulnerabilities to these 2 people who, from strangers, had transformed into something close to family. Autumn listened to everything with solemn attention, her large eyes fixed on Andrew's face, absorbing every word, every barely contained emotion. When he finished his account, a comfortable silence filled the room, interrupted only by the soft sound of monitors and the occasional cry of one of the twins. It was Autumn who finally broke the silence, her small but determined voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade of childish truth. "Can I visit your son? Maybe he needs a friend to talk to, even if he can't answer. Mom always says nobody should be alone when they're sick." The innocent question caught Andrew off guard. In all those months, Ethan had never received visits other than from himself and the medical team. The 11-year-old boy, once full of energy and curiosity, had gradually been forgotten by the outside world, as often happens with patients in prolonged coma. The idea that an unknown child would want to keep him company stirred in Andrew an emotion he couldn't immediately name. He swallowed hard, surprised by his own reaction. "Of course you can, Autumn. If the doctor authorizes it, I'll be happy to take you to meet Ethan tomorrow." And so it was done. The next day, Autumn, now able to walk short distances with the help of a wheelchair, was led by Andrew to the room where Ethan remained in his deep sleep. The room was spacious and bright, decorated with photographs of the boy in happy moments, playing soccer, playing the piano, at birthday parties with friends. Andrew watched with apprehension as the nurse helped Autumn approach the bed, uncertain about how the girl would react to the sight of someone in a coma. To his surprise, Autumn showed no fear or discomfort. On the contrary, her eyes lit up with gentle curiosity. "He seems to be just sleeping. He's not much older than me, is he? Do you think he can hear us?" Autumn's visits to Ethan became part of the daily routine. At first, Andrew remained in the room the entire time, watching with curiosity the one-sided interaction. Autumn talked to Ethan as if he could respond at any moment, telling him about the twins, about the drawings she made, about the stories the nurse read to her. There was no condescension in her approach, only the pure and direct acceptance that only children can offer, in situations that adults complicate with their expectations and fears. "Today I managed to walk to the garden without the wheelchair. It was only for a few steps, but the doctor said it's a good sign. When you wake up, we can walk through the garden together." As the days passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The nurses caring for Ethan noticed small changes in his vital signs during Autumn's visits. Nothing dramatic, just subtle alterations in brain pattern, a slight acceleration of heartbeat when she spoke. The doctors, initially skeptical, began to pay more attention, carefully documenting each reaction. Andrew, who had already gone through so many false hopes, tried to contain his own optimism, but it was impossible to ignore the spark of possibility that these small changes represented. Patients in coma often respond to familiar presence, voice, touch. It may mean nothing, but it could also be a positive sign. Let's continue observing. 1 month after the fateful encounter in the square, Autumn was sufficiently recovered to be discharged. Emily had also improved significantly, although she still needed continuous care to strengthen her damaged lungs. It was then that Andrew made the invitation he had been planning for weeks. On a quiet afternoon, while they watched the twins playing in their cribs, he proposed that the family move into his mansion until they were completely recovered and could safely restart their lives. He offered Emily a job at one of his companies as soon as she was able and promised to take care of Autumn's education and the twins' future. "I have a house that's too big for just one man, empty rooms begging for life. You would be doing me a favor, bringing sound and movement to those silent walls." The move to the mansion occurred the following week. Andrew had prepared everything personally, transforming an entire wing of the house into a welcoming space for the family. Autumn's room was especially close to his, decorated with bright colors and shelves full of children's books. The twins had a room converted into a nursery, with everything they might need. Emily, still moved by the inexplicable generosity of this stranger who had become her benefactor, received a room overlooking the garden with easy access to other areas of the house. "I never imagined that one day I would live in a place like this. It feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake up from." The new routine was soon established. Andrew continued visiting Ethan daily, but now almost always accompanied by Autumn. The girl had developed a peculiar connection with the boy in a coma, talking to him for hours, reading stories with her childish voice still in recovery, sometimes simply holding his hand in contemplative silence. The doctors, increasingly intrigued, carefully documented each reaction, each minimal change in Ethan's brain patterns when Autumn was present. There was something about the child's presence that reached the young man in a way that no one else could. It's as if she can reach him somewhere the rest of us cannot, as if they speak the same language at a level we don't understand. Andrew observed this connection with a mixture of hope and amazement. In all his life of business success, material achievements and influence, he had never witnessed something so inexplicable and at the same time so profoundly human as the bond that had formed between his comatose son and that child rescued from the streets. Sometimes he would stand in the hallway, listening to Autumn tell Ethan about her day, about her discoveries in the mansion, about the new drawings she had made especially for him. There was a purity in that interaction that moved him beyond words. "My plush angel always protected me when I was afraid. Mum said he has special powers. I think you need him more than I do now." On that particular afternoon, Andrew had left Autumn alone with Ethan for a few minutes while he took an important call in the hallway. When he returned, he found the girl leaning over the bed, placing something in his son's immobile hand. He approached silently, not wanting to interrupt the moment, and saw that it was a small plush angel worn by time and love, clearly the only toy Autumn possessed before meeting him. The scene froze his heart. That child who had so little, offering her most precious possession to a boy just a few years older than her, who couldn't even thank her. "This is my most special friend. He will stay with you now to protect you and help you find your way back home." Autumn placed the plush angel in Ethan's open palm, gently closing the young man's fingers around the small object. That's when it happened. At first, a subtle change. Ethan's fingers seemed to slightly squeeze the toy, an almost imperceptible movement that could easily be dismissed as imagination or wishful thinking. But then the heart monitors began to register changes, the brain pattern changed abruptly, and the machine started a chorus of sharp and insistent alarms. Andrew froze for a second before running to the hallway, calling for help. "Something's happening, come quickly, it's Ethan." In seconds, the medical team invaded the room, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals trained for emergencies. A nurse moved Autumn away from the bed, while doctors surrounded Ethan, checking vital signs, pupils, muscle responses. Andrew held Autumn protectively, both watching the scene with a mixture of terror and hope. The plush angel remained firmly gripped in Ethan's hand, as if he refused to let it go even amid the chaos. "Please, step back, we need space. Take the girl out." Andrew felt Autumn clinging to his leg, frightened by the sudden commotion and persistent alarms. He picked her up instinctively, but hesitated to leave the room, torn between the need to protect the child and the desperation to know what was happening to his son. One of the doctors looked at him urgently, making an emphatic gesture for them to leave. Reluctantly, Andrew took a step back, then another, until they were in the hallway, the door closing in front of them, separating them from the critical scene inside the room. What happened? Did I hurt him? I just wanted to give him my angel to protect him. Andrew knelt down to be at Autumn's eye level, seeing the fear and confusion in her gaze. He himself didn't know what to think, oscillating between the terror that something terrible was happening and the irrational hope that somehow that simple gesture of childish love had reached his son where all modern medicine had failed. He held the girl's small hands in his, trying to find words for a situation he didn't understand. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes the machines beep for various reasons. The doctors will take care of Ethan." The minutes dragged on like hours as they waited in the hallway. Emily had been called and was now beside them, a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. Andrew paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to press his ear against the door, trying to catch any information about what was happening inside. The alarms had ceased, replaced by an even more distressing silence. When the door finally opened, the doctor's face was an unreadable mask of professionalism, revealing neither good nor bad news. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk about what just happened with your son." Andrew followed the doctor to the small conference room, his body rigid with tension. Upon entering, He immediately noticed the different gleam in the specialist's eyes, a spark he hadn't seen in 8 long months of grim diagnoses and contained hopes. The doctor pointed to the images on the computer screen, colorful graphs showing Ethan's brain activity. "Mr. Mitchell, what we just witnessed is extraordinary. Your son showed a pattern of brain activity we haven't seen since the accident." At the exact moment Autumn placed the toy in his hand, there was a significant neurological response in several brain areas. Andrew needed to lean on the table to avoid falling, his legs suddenly unable to support the weight of hope growing in his chest. He looked at the images, trying to comprehend the meaning of those colorful patterns that to him were just meaningless blotches, but to the doctor represented the first concrete proof that Ethan might be coming back. "Does this mean he's waking up? My son is coming back?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, his face now allowing itself to show a cautious but genuine smile. He pointed to specific areas of the scan, explaining in simple terms what they were seeing: activity in regions responsible for hearing, emotional processing, memory. It wasn't just a reflex or random response. There was a pattern consistent with someone who is consciously processing external stimuli. "I can't make definitive promises, but these are the first real evidences that your son may be emerging from the coma." Something about the contact with Autumn, especially with that specific object, provoked a response we haven't been able to obtain with any of our treatments. Andrew returned to the hallway like a transformed man, his posture previously bent by the weight of uncertainty, now lifted by the first spark of concrete hope. Seeing Autumn and Emily anxiously waiting, he couldn't contain the tears he had repressed in front of the doctor. He knelt again before the girl, this time taking her small hands with almost sacred reverence. "Autumn, you did something wonderful. The doctors say Ethan responded to your angel. He might be starting to wake up thanks to you." The following days passed in an atmosphere of contained expectation. The medical team developed a new treatment protocol, incorporating Autumn's presence in structured daily sessions. The girl would sit beside Ethan's bed telling stories, singing children's songs, always with the small plush angel positioned in the boy's hand. Andrew watched in amazement as Autumn, so small and recently recovered from her own ordeal, seriously took on the mission of bringing his son back. "You need to come back, Ethan. Your father is waiting for you. And I really want to be your real friend too." 1 week after the first episode, during a particularly lively session where Autumn was reading a story about dragons and knights, what everyone had been anxiously waiting for happened. Ethan moved his fingers. Not an involuntary spasm, as the doctors had warned might happen, but a deliberate movement, squeezing the little plush angel. Autumn stopped reading, her wide eyes fixed on the hand that had moved. "He squeezed my little angel. He's hearing me, Mr. Andrew." The doctors confirmed what childlike intuition had already perceived. Ethan was consciously responding to stimuli. His tests showed patterns increasingly consistent with an emerging state of consciousness. From that day on, progress, although slow, became constant. First the finger movements, then subtle facial expressions, and finally, 10 days after the first sign, the moment Andrew would never forget, Ethan opened his eyes. "Dad." It was just a hoarse whisper after months of silence, but to Andrew it sounded like the most beautiful symphony in the world. His son was back, looking directly at him with clear recognition in his eyes. Doctors rushed to make assessments, but Andrew could only hold his son's hand, unable to let go, as if fearing that this miracle might unravel if he lost physical contact. "I'm here, Ethan. I've been here the whole time, waiting for you." Ethan's recovery surprised the entire medical team in the weeks that followed. What would normally take months of slow progress happened with extraordinary speed. It was as if, once the barrier of consciousness was broken, he was determined to quickly make up for lost time. Intensive physiotherapy, which Andrew ensured was of the highest quality, helped restore muscle strength weakened by prolonged immobility. Cognitive functions, which doctors feared had been permanently damaged, proved remarkably preserved. "I've never seen anything like this in my entire career. It's as if he had just been sleeping, not in a deep coma for 8 months. Autumn became a constant presence during the recovery, visiting Ethan daily, bringing drawings, telling stories about the twins, and about life in Andrew's mansion. A pure and genuine friendship blossomed between the children, as if they had known each other for years, not just a few weeks. Ethan, still fragile but recovering each day, eagerly awaited Autumn's visits, his face lighting up when he saw her enter the room. "Tell me more about the babies. Can they say anything yet? I can't wait to really meet them." Emily, observing the miraculous transformation in all those lives, including her own, frequently expressed her gratitude to Andrew in private conversations. From a single mother struggling to survive on the streets with 3 children, she had transformed into a woman with purpose and hope, beginning to work part-time in the administrative department of one of Andrew's companies, while continuing her own recovery. "When I think about where we would be if you hadn't stopped that night, there are no words to thank you enough." 2 months after Ethan's awakening, the big day finally arrived. With the enthusiastic blessing of the medical team, Ethan was discharged from the hospital. Dressed in new clothes, sitting in a wheelchair used more as a medical precaution than out of real necessity, he looked like another boy compared to that motionless body that had inhabited that room for so long. Andrew had prepared a surprise. Not only were Autumn and Emily waiting at the hospital entrance, but all the mansion staff with balloons, posters, and a small children's choir from the school where Ethan had studied before the accident. "Welcome back, champion. We've all been waiting for you." The arrival at the mansion was an even bigger celebration. A huge banner with the words, "Welcome home, Ethan," stretched across the main entrance. The interior of the house, previously decorated with the sobriety that reflected Andrew's silent mourning, now displayed vibrant colors, fresh flowers, and new photographs, not just of Ethan, but also of Autumn, Emily, and the twins, forming a visual mosaic of the new family that had formed in such unexpected ways. Our house finally feels like a real home, with people, with life, with love. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once echoed with the silence of absence now overflowed with sounds of life. Children's laughter, animated conversations during meals, music coming from the piano that Ethan had started playing again, still with some difficulty but with growing enthusiasm. Autumn, who had never had the opportunity to study formally, now attended classes with a private tutor alongside Ethan, both sharing the excitement of learning and discovering the world together. "Did you know that stars are like our sun, only much farther away? One day I want to be an astronomer and discover new planets." On a particularly beautiful afternoon, 3 months after Ethan's return home, Andrew observed the children playing in the garden from the terrace. Ethan, physically fully recovered, was running with Autumn in a lively game of tag, while the twins, now taking their first steps, tried to keep up with them on wobbly legs. Emily approached silently, bringing 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Andrew and stood beside him, sharing the moment of peaceful contemplation. "Sometimes I still find myself thinking this is all a dream too good to be true. Of all the squares in all the cities on that stormy night, you just happened to pass by ours." Andrew smiled, remembering the unlikely chain of coincidences, or was it destiny, that had united them. If he had decided to go home by another route, if he hadn't looked at the square at that exact moment, if he hadn't stopped the car. So many small moments of decision that could have completely altered the course of their lives. And then he thought of the small plush angel, now shared between Ethan and Autumn, passing from one child to another like a talisman of protection and love. Perhaps there are no coincidences, Emily. Perhaps we are all part of something greater that we cannot fully understand. Ethan's complete recovery was officially celebrated with a big party in the mansion's garden. Friends, doctors, nurses, all who had participated in that extraordinary journey, gathered to celebrate what many openly called a miracle. At the center of it all, Ethan and Autumn ran and played as if there had never been illness or suffering in their lives. The plush angel occupied a place of honor on a small table, specially decorated for the occasion, a tangible symbol of the inexplicable bond that had united 2 previously stranger families. Miracles happen all around us every day. We just need to have eyes to see them and open hearts to receive them. As the sun set on that perfect day, casting golden hues over the garden filled with laughter and music, Andrew finally felt something he had forgotten was possible, complete and unreserved happiness. Watching the children playing, Emily chatting animatedly with the guests, the twins peacefully asleep on a large blanket spread on the grass, He knew he had found much more than he expected on that stormy night. Not only had his son returned, but an entire family had formed, filling the empty spaces of his life with love, purpose, and renewed hope. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come disguised as our greatest challenges. And sometimes guardian angels appear exactly when we need them most. The adaptation to the new life proceeded with a naturalness that surprised everyone. A comforting routine was established in the mansion, creating a structure that especially benefited the children. Mornings began with a lively breakfast. Everyone gathered at the large dining room table that for years had served only Andrew alone. Ethan and Autumn attended classes together in the mansion's library, transformed into a cozy study room, with a private tutor that Andrew had hired. The twins, now almost a year old, charmed everyone with their smiles and first words, growing strong and healthy under the loving care of their mother and the staff that Andrew had hired to assist her. I never thought this house could contain so much happiness. For years, each room only reminded me of what I had lost. The afternoons were usually dedicated to Ethan's physical therapy, which continued to strengthen muscles weakened by months of immobility. Autumn faithfully accompanied him, transforming the exercises into games and challenges that made recovery less monotonous. The doctors, who continued to follow the case with professional and personal interest, marveled at the speed of recovery. The chief neurologist confided to Andrew that in his 30 years of career he had never witnessed such a rapid and complete rehabilitation after such a prolonged coma. Medicine explains part of what we're seeing, Mr. Mitchell. But there's something else happening here, something that transcends our books and studies. Emily, for her part, flourished in her new life with a dignity that impressed everyone. She never passively accepted Andrew's generosity, insisting on contributing in some way. She began working part-time in the administrative department of one of his companies, showing an intelligence and dedication that soon led her to a position of greater responsibility. In the evenings after work, she devoted herself to online courses, determined to recover the years of formal education that hard life on the streets had denied her. Andrew, observing her determination, offered her the opportunity to pursue a university degree, which she accepted with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just save our lives that night, Andrew. You gave us back our dreams, our dignity, our future." The most remarkable transformation, however, occurred in Andrew himself. The ruthless businessman, known in financial circles for his calculating coldness and unwavering determination, gave way to a more reflective and present man. He drastically reduced his workload, delegating responsibilities to spend more time at home. His priorities changed so fundamentally that his oldest associates barely recognized him. When questioned about this change during a rare appearance at a business meeting, his response was simple and direct. "I discovered that building a family is much more challenging and rewarding than building an empire." As the months passed, the extraordinary story of Ethan's recovery and the providential rescue of Autumn and her family began to attract attention beyond medical circles. Journalists attempted to make contact, wanting to write about the miracle of the coma boy. Andrew protected the children's privacy with fierce determination, refusing all interview requests and keeping discreet security guards at the mansion gates to ward off more persistent reporters. His absolute priority was to ensure that Ethan and Autumn could live their childhoods away from the media spotlight and public curiosity that would certainly transform them into attractions. They are children, not stories to entertain the public. What we experience belongs only to us. However, Andrew understood that their experience could generate something positive for other families facing similar situations. After long conversations with Emily and consultations with public health experts, he decided to channel a significant portion of his fortune into a new venture. Thus was born the Guardian Angel Foundation, dedicated simultaneously to advanced research on coma states and comprehensive support for homeless families with sick children. The choice of name, suggested by Autumn during a family dinner, was unanimously approved by everyone. "If I can use my resources to prevent other families from going through what we went through, then our ordeal will have served a greater purpose." The project began modestly, with the acquisition of a building near the hospital where Ethan had been admitted. The space was completely renovated to house both neurological research laboratories and temporary apartments for low-income families with hospitalized children. Andrew hired the best architects to ensure the environment was welcoming and dignifying, refusing to create something that resembled an institutional shelter. Each apartment was designed as a true temporary home, with private rooms, equipped kitchens, and common spaces where families could share experiences and mutual support. When Emily and Autumn were sick, they had nowhere to go. No one should have to choose between being with a hospitalized child or seeking shelter for the rest of the family. The Foundation's research area quickly gained international prestige by bringing together neurologists, psychologists, and trauma recovery specialists from various countries. In parallel, the Foundation's social assistance program expanded rapidly, extending its services beyond accommodation. Vulnerable families received legal support to access government benefits, guidance for reintegration into the job market, and psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of illness and poverty. Inspired by Emily's determination, the Foundation created an educational program that allowed parents to continue their studies while their children received treatment, with scholarships for technical and university courses. 1 year after the Foundation's inauguration, the family celebrated not only the project's success, but primarily the extraordinary journey that had united them. In the mansion that had once been silent, laughter and conversations now echoed. Ethan, completely recovered, divided his time between studies and helping Autumn take care of the twins, who were growing strong and healthy. Emily and Andrew, initially brought together by tragedy, discovered along the way a deep and unexpected love, formalizing their union in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's gardens. The small plush angel, catalyst for that entire miracle, occupied a place of honor in the living room, reminding everyone that sometimes life's greatest gifts emerge in the most difficult moments, and that the true miracle wasn't just Ethan's recovery, but the family that formed when destiny placed a millionaire and a girl with 2 babies who had fainted in the square on the same path on a stormy night. Did you like this story? Comment where you're from, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you on screen. Don't forget to comment. I'll be waiting for you there. The living room of the mansion glowed with golden light streaming through the enormous glass windows. Noble wooden furniture, authentic Persian rugs, and paintings by renowned artists adorned the space, creating an atmosphere of wealth and elegance that contrasted with the palpable tension hanging in the air. Dorothy, an elderly lady with silver hair perfectly arranged in a discreet bun, moved with difficulty through the space. Her eyes, once a vibrant brown, now seemed opaque and tired, but still held a glimmer of kindness that neither years nor hardships had managed to erase. Her hands, marked by time and work, trembled slightly as she held the silver tray with the tea set that had belonged to her family for generations. She walked with slow and careful steps, as if each movement required an extraordinary effort from her fragile body. "I prepared your favorite tea, my son. The one with special leaves that your father always liked to drink when he needed to think clearly," Dorothy said with a sweet voice, placing the fine porcelain cup next to the paperwork that Russell was examining with almost obsessive attention. Russell didn't raise his eyes to thank her. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with impeccable posture, he wore a perfectly fitted suit that seemed to have been sewn directly onto his body. His black hair, with just a few grey strands at the temples, was meticulously combed back, revealing angular features that might be considered attractive, were it not for the coldness emanating from them. His eyes, the same brown color as his mother's, didn't carry the same warmth. They were calculating, pragmatic, as if constantly evaluating the worth of everything and everyone around him. His fingers, with perfectly trimmed and manicured nails, drummed impatiently on the documents while he pretended to analyze them, though he already knew every comma contained in those pages. "I don't have time for tea, Mother. I have important matters to resolve, and you're bothering me with these unnecessary formalities," he responded dryly, finally raising his gaze to face Dorothy with barely disguised irritation. The lady's eyes momentarily filled with sadness, but she quickly disguised it with a resigned smile. This wasn't the boy she had raised with so much love and dedication. For a moment, her mind wandered to the past, and she could clearly see the image of Russell at 6 years old, with scraped knees and eyes full of tears after falling off his bicycle. Dorothy had rushed to help him, cleaning his wounds carefully while humming a lullaby to calm him. She remembered how he would hug her tightly during stormy nights, afraid of thunder, and how she would stay awake beside his bed until he fell asleep. She recalled the sacrifices she had made to ensure he had the best possible education, the overtime hours worked after her husband's death, the sleepless nights sewing clothes to supplement their income, the meals she skipped so that her son would never lack anything. "Forgive me, I just thought you might like something to drink while you work." "You always liked my tea," Dorothy murmured, taking a step back and holding the tray more firmly to hide the tremor that was intensifying in her hands. The heavy silence was interrupted only by the sound of the antique clock, marking each second with relentless precision. Dorothy remained standing as if waiting for permission to withdraw, while Russell returned his attention to the documents. The tension grew with each tick-tock of the clock, filling the air with a somber presentiment that made the elderly woman's heart tighten in her chest. She knew her son well enough to know that something serious was about to happen. Russell always had that particular expression when he was about to deliver news he knew would cause pain to others, a mixture of impatience and contempt, as if he were merely dealing with an irritating inconvenience, not human feelings. "I sold the house," he finally announced, without any preamble or consideration, like someone commenting on the weather or any other trivial matter. Dorothy felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. The tray slipped slightly from her hands, causing the porcelain to clink dangerously. Her eyes widened in absolute shock, and her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Perhaps her ears were playing tricks on her, as occasionally happened in recent years. But the resolute expression on Russell's face confirmed that she had heard correctly. "You sold our house? But how could you do this without consulting me? This mansion? It was your father who built it with so much love for us," Dorothy stammered, her voice broken by surprise and pain that began spreading through her body like poison. Russell let out an exasperated sigh, as if explaining something obvious to a particularly slow child. His eyes showed no remorse or compassion as he faced his mother in her moment of vulnerability. On the contrary, there was a calculating coldness that would have frightened Dorothy, if she weren't already so devastated by the news itself. "Business isn't going well, Mother. I need immediate liquidity, and this house is too valuable an asset to sit idle while we face financial difficulties," he explained with cruel rationality. "Besides, you're too old to live alone in this huge place. It's time to consider alternatives more suitable to your condition." Dorothy felt as if each word was a needle piercing her already fragile heart. That house wasn't just a property or an investment. It was the repository of an entire life. Every corner held a precious memory. The bedroom where she had watched over Russell's sleep so many nights when he was a child, the kitchen where she had prepared countless meals for the family, the garden where her late husband had planted roses that still bloomed each spring like a promise of eternal love. The walls of that mansion had witnessed joys, sorrows, beginnings and farewells. It was more than a roof. It was a sanctuary of memories that Dorothy revisited daily, finding comfort and purpose in her solitude. "But where will I go? This is my home, the place where I spent my entire adult life, where I raised you, where your father and I built our family," Dorothy questioned, with tears beginning to form in her wrinkled eyes. "All my memories are here." Russell rose from his chair in a fluid movement, adjusting his jacket with an automatic gesture. His posture dominated the environment, making Dorothy seem even smaller and more fragile by comparison. There was an air of impatience in his every movement, as if this conversation were an inconvenient item on his packed schedule. He walked to the window, observing the mansion's expansive garden with an evaluative look, as if already calculating how much profit he would obtain from the sale. "I've already found a perfectly suitable place for you. It's a cozy establishment, with people your age and professionals who can take care of all your needs," he replied, carefully choosing his words to mask the reality of what he was really planning. "You won't have to worry about maintaining a large house nor about loneliness. It's the best solution for everyone." Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that tone well. It was the same one Russell used in negotiations when trying to convince someone to accept an unfavorable deal. She might not understand finance or business strategies, but she perfectly understood when she was being manipulated. Something in the way he talked about this cozy place, awakened an instinctive dread in her. It wasn't just fear of change or the unknown. It was the certainty that her own son was plotting something that wouldn't be for her benefit. When will I have to leave? I need time to organize my things, to say goodbye to this place, she asked, trying to maintain her composure despite the desperation growing in her chest. Russell ostentatiously consulted his expensive wristwatch, as if counting the minutes lost in that conversation. His face displayed an expression of false concern that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He approached Dorothy and placed his hands on her fragile shoulders, in a gesture that might seem affectionate to an inattentive observer, but which the elderly woman perceived as just another act. The new owners want the house vacated by tomorrow. I've already arranged a team to pack your essential belongings. Don't worry about anything, I'll take care of all the details, he informed with fake solicitude. Tomorrow I'll take you to your new home. Trust me, Mother. I'm doing this for your own good. Before Dorothy could fully process what was happening or gather strength to protest, the sound of high heels on the marble floor announced Brittany's arrival. The young woman entered the room with the familiarity of someone who already considered herself the owner of the place. At just over 30, Brittany was the epitome of calculated beauty, perfectly dyed blonde hair, flawless makeup, a body shaped by hours at the gym and discreet surgical interventions, and a smile that never reached her shrewd eyes. She was wearing a tight dress that had certainly cost the equivalent of months of Dorothy's budget when she still managed the household, and her strong perfume invaded the room, overpowering the gentle aroma of tea. "Hello, dear Dorothy. How are you feeling today?" Brittany greeted with sweetness as artificial as her fake nails. "Russell told me about the new plans. I'm sure you'll love the new place, much more suitable for someone in your condition." Dorothy felt a wave of nausea as she noticed the look of complicity that Brittany exchanged with Russell. It was as if both shared a private joke at her expense, a silent conspiracy of which she was simultaneously the target and the only one excluded. The tray in her hand seemed increasingly heavy, as if the weight of the entire situation had materialized in that object. With an almost superhuman effort, she managed to place it on the side table without dropping anything. "If you'll excuse me, I need to withdraw for a moment," Dorothy muttered, unable to endure that farce of concern any longer. "I apparently need to start sorting through my things." Russell made a dismissive gesture of agreement, clearly relieved to end that uncomfortable conversation. As soon as Dorothy left the room with faltering steps, the mask of false consideration on his face completely crumbled, giving way to a malicious smile. Brittany immediately approached him, wrapping her arm around his with intimacy and speaking in a low voice but not low enough to go unheard. "Did she believe your story?" Brittany asked with a complicit smile, her eyes shining with poorly disguised ambition. "She seems quite shaken." Russell laughed softly, a sound without any trace of genuine joy, only cruel satisfaction for a well-executed plan. He pulled Brittany closer, whispering in her ear as if sharing a precious secret, his eyes fixed in the direction his mother had gone, ensuring she was truly out of reach. "Tomorrow we'll get rid of her and finally have access to that safe the old man hid," he responded, with perverse satisfaction. "My father was always too suspicious, keeping secrets even from me. But now, with the old woman out of the way, I'll have access to everything that belongs to me by right." What the couple didn't realize was that Dorothy hadn't completely moved away. Something in her maternal instinct, that same instinct that had so often alerted her when Russell lied in his childhood, had made her stop and partially hide behind the half-open door. Sometimes, age came accompanied not only by physical limitations, but also by wisdom born from experience. And Dorothy knew her son too well not to suspect his true intentions. Upon hearing the cruel words exchanged between Russell and Brittany, Dorothy felt as if an invisible fist was squeezing her heart. The pain was so intense, so overwhelming, that for a moment she thought it might be purely emotional, the suffering of a mother betrayed by her own son. But she soon realized it was something more serious, something physical and dangerously real. A tightness in her chest that radiated to her left arm, a pressure that made each breath a monumental effort. Dorothy brought her trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart beating irregularly and painfully. Her vision began to blur, not just from the tears now freely running down her wrinkled face, but from something more concerning. The world around her seemed to spin at a dizzying speed, and she needed to lean against the wall to keep from falling. With superhuman effort and driven by survival instinct, she managed to silently move away, stumbling down the hallway toward her room. "My medicine. I need my medicine," she murmured to herself, her voice almost inaudible as she struggled to remain conscious. Each step was a battle against the searing pain and weakness spreading throughout her body. Dorothy knew these symptoms well. It wasn't the first time her fragile heart had protested against intense emotions, but never before had it been so strong, so frightening. The doctor had repeatedly warned her about the importance of avoiding stressful situations and taking her medication regularly. "Your heart is tired, Mrs. Dorothy," he had said during her last appointment. "We need to care for it with all affection and attention." Finally reaching her room, Dorothy went directly to the bedside table where she kept her medications. Her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold the small bottle of pills. When she finally managed to grasp it, a new wave of despair hit her. When she shook it, she didn't hear the familiar sound of pills. With increasing panic, she opened the bottle and turned it over, confirming her worst fears. It was completely empty. "It cannot be. I got a new box at the pharmacy last week," she whispered, confused and terrified. In that terrible moment of clarity, Dorothy understood that it hadn't been forgetfulness on her part. She remembered how Russell had insisted on helping her with her medications in recent days, claiming concern about her increasingly fragile memory. He had offered to organize her medicines, to ensure she wouldn't get confused with schedules and dosages. And she, touched by that rare gesture of apparent consideration, had allowed it. Reality hit Dorothy with overwhelming cruelty. Her own son had deliberately removed her vital medication, probably hoping she would suffer exactly what was happening now. It wasn't just her house and her memories that Russell wanted to take, it was her very life. The pain in her chest intensified with this understanding, and Dorothy staggered to her bed, falling heavily onto the mattress as she struggled for each breath. "My God, what has my son become?" she asked herself in a broken sigh, as darkness began to invade her peripheral vision. In her last moments of lucidity, before unconsciousness mercifully enveloped her, Dorothy thought of her deceased husband and how he had always been suspicious of their son's excessive ambition. "Our Russell has my talent for business, but he doesn't have your heart," he used to say. "One day I fear that will destroy him and everyone around him." With surprising clarity for someone on the verge of fainting, Dorothy realized she would need all her strength and cunning to survive not just her son's betrayal, but also the crucial hours ahead. "I won't give up without a fight," was her last conscious thought before the world around her completely disappeared, swallowed by a black veil of pain and absence. The gloomy corridor of the nursing home seemed endless, with peeling walls of a faded green that resembled abandoned hospitals more than a place of care. Fluorescent lights flickered irregularly, creating dancing shadows that moved like specters along the worn linoleum floor. The strong smell of cheap disinfectant mingled with other less identifiable odors, creating an oppressive atmosphere that weighed on the shoulders of anyone who ventured down that path. Identical doors lined both sides, some ajar revealing fragments of lives reduced to metal beds and scarce belongings. From one of the rooms came the muffled sound of an old television, broadcasting soap operas at excessively high volume to compensate for the deteriorated hearing of its viewers. From another, the unintelligible murmur of someone conversing with interlocutors who existed only in their confused mind. Amid all this, occasional screams of pain or calls for help echoed, often ignored by the facility's overburdened staff. "Doctor, she's finally waking up. Should I call her son?" He left specific instructions to be informed when she regained consciousness, asked a young, hesitant voice, as if not entirely convinced that following those instructions would be the right thing to do. In the tiny room at the end of the corridor, Dorothy slowly opened her eyes as if each eyelid weighed tons. The dim light entering through the only window covered by yellowed curtains was enough to reveal the precarious state of the environment. A metal bed with a mattress too thin to offer any comfort, walls stained with moisture, a small wardrobe with one door precariously hanging from a single hinge, and a nightstand where a half-empty glass of water rested. The ceiling had brownish stains from leaks, forming patterns that seemed to accusingly observe whoever lay below them. The floor of broken ceramic was clean, but showed the wear of decades of continuous use and insufficient maintenance. The air had that characteristic smell of institutions, a mixture of medications, industrial disinfectant, and that indescribable essence of abandonment that seems to permeate places where people are sent to be forgotten. Where? Where am I? What happened? Muttered Dorothy, her voice hoarse and confused as she tried to orient herself in a completely unfamiliar environment. This isn't my home. Russell, can someone tell me what's going on? A young nurse quickly approached the bed. Lindsay couldn't have been more than 25, with a gentle face framed by dark hair tied in a practical bun. Her hands, though worn from constant use of harsh cleaning products, moved with delicacy as she adjusted Dorothy's pillows. There was a genuine compassion in her eyes that contrasted with the professional indifference of most staff in that place. Her white uniform, impeccably clean despite the environment, seemed out of place in that scene of widespread neglect, as if Lindsay were an anomaly of care in a system designed for forgetfulness. Easy, Mrs. Dorothy. You're at Golden Rest Nursing Home. You were brought in during the night by your son. You fainted at home and he brought you here so we could take care of you. My name is Lindsay and I'm one of the nurses here, explained the young woman in a soft voice while checking the elderly woman's pulse. How are you feeling now? Are you in any pain? The confusion on Dorothy's face gradually transformed into understanding, and then horror as memories of the previous night returned in painful flashes. Russell's cold announcement about selling the mansion, the cruelty in his voice when speaking to Brittany about getting rid of her, the empty medication bottle, the searing pain in her chest. All of that hadn't been a terribly real nightmare. It was her new reality. Her eyes scanned the deteriorated room, absorbing every detail with growing despair. This place wasn't a hospital, as her mind initially supposed. It was something much worse, something she had feared in the past, when she heard stories of elderly people abandoned by their families. A low-cost nursing home where people were deposited when they became inconvenient for their relatives. A place to die forgotten, away from society's eyes. No, there must be some mistake. I shouldn't be here. My son is trying to get rid of me to take possession of our house, our assets. He brought me here without my consent. I need to leave immediately. I need to talk to someone. Call the police, exclaimed Dorothy, trying to sit up and immediately being overcome by dizziness that made her fall back against the pillows. Lindsay exchanged a quick glance with another staff member passing by the door, a look that Dorothy caught and immediately understood. It was the kind of look people exchange when they hear what they consider to be delusions of an elderly and confused mind. The nurse adjusted the sheet over Dorothy with an understanding but condescending smile, while speaking in a tone one would use with an agitated child or with someone whose sanity is questioned. Mrs. Dorothy, your son Russell explained everything to us. You had an episode of mental confusion at home, something common for people your age. He brought you here so we could properly care for you, since he cannot offer the specialized attention you need. It was all done with your well-being in mind, said Lindsay, clearly repeating what she had been instructed to say. The admission documents were all properly filled out and signed. The feeling of powerlessness that came over Dorothy was more crushing than any physical pain she had ever experienced. She was trapped. Her own son had effectively kidnapped her from her home and deposited her in this desolate place, probably with a convincing story about her supposed senility, and worst of all, nobody would believe her. How many times had she herself heard similar stories in the past and thought, with sadness but without surprise, that it was probably a case of mental confusion. The cruel perfection of Russell's plan hit her with full force. Who would give credit to the word of an apparently confused elderly woman against that of a respected businessman, concerned about his aging mother's well-being? My belongings, my clothes, my documents, my medications, where are they? I need them, especially my heart medication, questioned Dorothy, trying to maintain calm and lucidity, knowing that any excessive display of emotion would only reinforce the image of instability that Russell had certainly painted of her. Lindsay hesitated for a moment, her gaze softening with something that seemed like genuine concern. There was something in the clarity of Dorothy's eyes, in the precise articulation of her words, that didn't match the profile of mental confusion that Russell had described. The young nurse had worked long enough in that place to recognize the real signs of dementia or confusion, and Dorothy displayed none of them. On the contrary, despite the evident shock, her thoughts were coherent, and her memory seemed perfectly functional. You arrived with only the clothes on your back, without any documents or personal belongings. Your son mentioned he would bring some basic things later today. As for medications, we have a doctor who makes weekly visits here. He can evaluate you and prescribe whatever is necessary, responded Lindsay, carefully observing Dorothy's reaction. Do you remember which medicines you take regularly? I can write them down to inform the doctor. Dorothy closed her eyes for a moment, fighting against the wave of despair that threatened to engulf her. Without her documents, without her essential medications, without any means of contact with the outside world. Russell had thought of everything. The absence of her most basic belongings wasn't an oversight. It was part of a meticulous plan to isolate her completely, to erase her identity and autonomy, reducing her to just another anonymous elderly woman in a decaying nursing home. My heart medication is vital. Without it. Dorothy didn't complete the sentence, but the meaning hung in the air between them like a dark presence. Please, I need you to believe me. I'm not confused. My son is plotting something terrible. I heard him talking with his girlfriend about getting rid of me to access a safe deposit box that my late husband left. He intentionally emptied my medication bottles. This isn't paranoia, it's the truth. Something in the intensity of Dorothy's gaze, in the consistency of her story, and in the precision of her details made Lindsay momentarily doubt the version she had received. The nurse had witnessed similar scenes before. Wealthy families depositing elderly relatives in that God-forsaken place, often motivated by inheritance disputes or simply by the inconvenience of caring for an aging relative. But there was always something in the stories told by the elderly that sounded disconnected, fragmented, mixing facts with confabulations. Dorothy's narrative, on the other hand, was frighteningly coherent. I'll see what I can do, Mrs. Dorothy. Perhaps we can consult your previous medical records to confirm your medications. For now, try to rest, said Lindsay, adjusting the elderly woman's pillow and lowering her voice to an almost inaudible whisper. And don't worry, not everyone here thinks you're confused. I've noticed your lucidity. The following hours dragged on with torturous slowness for Dorothy. Confined to that tiny room, she alternated between periods of absolute despair and moments of iron determination. Her mind, still sharp despite her age, worked incessantly, seeking a way out of that trap carefully constructed by her own son. Every noise in the hallway made her stiffen, fearing and simultaneously hoping for Russell's visit. She needed to confront him, needed to try to understand how the boy she had raised with so much love could have transformed into a calculating monster capable of practically sentencing his own mother to death. I can't give up now. I still have the strength to fight. I can still find someone who believes me, Dorothy murmured to herself, clinging to hope like a castaway to a piece of wood. If only I could contact Anthony, my husband's old lawyer and friend. The sound of firm footsteps in the corridor interrupted her thoughts. They weren't Lindsay's light and hurried steps, nor the dragging of tired feet from other staff members. They were decisive steps, of someone accustomed to making his way through the world with the certainty of one who never encounters obstacles. Dorothy knew that sound well. It was Russell approaching. For a brief moment she felt a wave of dread, but it was soon replaced by surprising determination. This could be her only moment to confront him, to try to make him reconsider, or at least to understand the true dimensions of the danger she was in. "Hello, Mother. How are you adapting to your new home?" asked Russell as he entered the room, carrying a small plastic bag that he disinterestedly deposited on the bed. "I brought some basic clothes and hygiene items. I didn't go overboard with details. After all, your needs now are quite simple." Russell seemed even more imposing in that degraded environment, like a king visiting the most miserable of dungeons. His expensive suit and refined perfume contrasted violently with the decay of the nursing home, creating a visual dissonance that only accentuated the cruelty of the situation. He maintained a polite smile on his lips, but his eyes remained cold and calculating, examining his mother as one who evaluates a problem about to be solved. He had closed the door upon entering, ensuring that no one could hear their conversation, a detail that didn't go unnoticed by Dorothy. "Why are you doing this to me, Russell? What did I do to deserve such treatment from my own son?" Dorothy asked directly, her voice surprisingly firm despite the fragility of her body. All I ever did was love you unconditionally, sacrifice my life for your happiness. A dry laugh without humor escaped Russell's lips. He pulled the room's only chair and sat down, crossing his legs with studied elegance. For a moment, his face displayed something close to sincerity, a rare window into his true thoughts, usually hidden beneath layers of dissimulation. Love unconditionally. Sacrifices. Is that what you call raising a child under the constant shadow of a father who never trusted him? Do you have any idea what it was like growing up knowing that my own father kept secrets from me, setting traps and contingencies as if I were an enemy and not his only heir? Russell replied, a trace of genuine bitterness permeating his usually controlled voice. But that doesn't matter anymore. Business is business, and you've become an obstacle to my ambitions. Dorothy observed her son with a mixture of horror and deep sadness. For the first time, she glimpsed the extent of the distortion that had occurred in Russell's mind over the years. Somehow he had rewritten the history of his own childhood, transforming his father's care and prudence into distrust, love into manipulation. The fault wasn't just Russell's. Perhaps she and her husband had made mistakes they hadn't realized, wounds they never saw heal properly. Your father loved you deeply, Russell. If he took precautions, it was because he knew the temptations that wealth can bring. He wanted to protect you, not punish you, Dorothy explained, trying to reach some remnant of the boy she had raised. We can still resolve this as a family. It's not too late. Russell rose abruptly, all pretense of civility disappearing from his countenance. He approached the bed with determined steps, leaning until his face was inches from his mother's. His eyes now no longer hid the contempt and cruelty that dwelled within him. It's been too late for years, Mother. The mansion has already been sold, the contract signed this morning. I already have access to all the family bank accounts, thanks to the power of attorney you naively granted me when you began to feel too tired to deal with bureaucracies, he revealed, savoring each word like a predator would savor its prey's fear. And that secret safe in the office, I found it 3 days ago, hidden exactly where I suspected all these years. Dorothy's blood froze in her veins. The office safe contained not only important documents and some valuables, it also contained the alternative will her husband had prepared, anticipating exactly this type of situation. A document that would effectively disinherit Russell if he tried to harm Dorothy or irresponsibly squander the family patrimony. And the documents that were inside. The alternative will? She asked, unable to hide the fear in her voice. Russell's smile widened, revealing an almost predatory satisfaction. He sat back in the chair, now completely at ease, like a king contemplating a newly conquered kingdom. Burned. Every page, every contingency my father created to control me beyond the grave, all reduced to ashes, he answered, with terrifying calm. It's fascinating how quickly fire consumes paper, isn't it? In minutes, decades of planning disappeared forever. Dorothy felt as if an invisible hand squeezed her chest again. Her last fragment of hope had been cruelly torn away. Without the alternative will, without documents, without witnesses, she was completely at her son's mercy. The question that escaped her lips was no longer about solution, it was about understanding. Why not simply wait? I'm an elderly woman, Russell. My remaining years are few. Why not just let nature take its course? She questioned, trying to comprehend the depth of her son's cruelty. Russell stood up again, this time walking to the small window. He briefly looked at the outside world, a cracked concrete courtyard where some elderly people in wheelchairs were left in the sun, like wilting plants waiting for water that would never come. When he turned to Dorothy again, there was no longer any pretense in his expression. Because I have no time to waste, Mother. Each day with you alive is a day when something could go wrong. Someone might discover the existence of that will. Some old friend of the old man might show up asking inconvenient questions, he explained with brutal frankness. Besides, your fragile heart needs expensive medications, constant care, resources I prefer to invest in my future, not in prolonging your past. The naked cruelty in Russell's words hit Dorothy like a physical blow. It wasn't just greed or resentment, it was something deeper, more disturbing. A fundamental absence of empathy, an inability to recognize the value of human life, especially the life of the one who had brought him into the world. You will die in this nursing home, Russell continued, approaching again, his voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "Nobody will believe a confused old woman. Your new medications, placebos, your story about a cruel son abandoning his elderly mother, dementia delusions, your requests for help, senile confusion. In a week, maybe 2, your heart will simply stop, and I'll arrange a modest but dignified funeral." The devoted son, devastated by the loss of his dear mother after a long battle against age and mental confusion. Dorothy looked at her son, really looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. There was no longer any trace of the boy she had loved, of the young man she had raised. In his place was a stranger with her son's face, a man consumed by ambition and empty of humanity. "I understand now," Dorothy said softly, a surprising calmness enveloping her. "You are no longer my son. My son died at some point I didn't notice, and you took his place. May God have mercy on your soul, Russell, because you will have no peace with what you're doing." Something in Dorothy's tranquility seemed to disturb Russell more than any protest or plea would have done. He expected fear, despair, perhaps even anger, emotions that would fuel his sense of power and control. His mother's serene acceptance, almost like a final blessing, destabilized his carefully constructed balance. "Keep your superstitions to yourself, old woman. God, if he exists, is clearly on my side so far," he retorted, quickly composing himself and walking toward the door. "I won't visit you again. The next news I'll have will be of your death. Goodbye, Mother." With these cruel words, Russell left the room, firmly closing the door behind him. In the hallway, he passed by Lindsay without even noticing her, as if the young nurse were just another insignificant object in that scene of misery. His posture was that of a man who had concluded an unpleasant but necessary business, walking toward a bright future built on the ruins of his past. Inside the room, Dorothy remained motionless for long minutes, fully absorbing the reality of her situation. There was no more room for denial or naive hope. Her own son had effectively sentenced her to death, meticulously planning every detail so it would seem natural and inevitable. The pain in her chest returned, sharper this time, accompanied by a sensation of weakness that rapidly spread throughout her body. "I can't give up now. I need to find a way," she murmured, struggling to remain conscious as darkness began to invade her peripheral vision again. "Lindsay! I need to speak with Lindsay." The sound of the door opening brought a last glimpse of hope before darkness completely enveloped her. Lindsay entered the room hurriedly, her young face contorted in genuine concern upon seeing Dorothy fainting on the bed. The nurse rushed to her side, checking her vital signs with efficiency born of experience. "Dr. Mitchell, I need Dr. Mitchell immediately," Lindsay shouted into the hallway while trying to stabilize Dorothy. "Hold on, Mrs. Dorothy, don't give up now, I believe you." Lindsay's words were the last thing Dorothy heard before completely submerging into unconsciousness. Her body had reached its limit of resistance, deprived of essential medications and subjected to devastating emotional stress. As darkness enveloped her, one thought persisted in her mind. If this was to be her end, it would not be the end Russell had planned. Somehow, in some way, the truth needed to come to light. Hours later, in the small improvised office of the nursing home, Dr. Mitchell finished examining Dorothy, now stabilized but still unconscious. He was a middle-aged man, with tired eyes that had witnessed more suffering than they would have liked. His grave expression as he removed the stethoscope left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Lindsay anxiously awaited his diagnosis with a concern that went beyond professional obligation. "The situation is serious, Lindsay. Her heart is extremely compromised," the doctor explained, rubbing his tired eyes. "The initial tests confirm what she mentioned. She needs specific medication for her heart, a continuous treatment that was clearly abruptly interrupted." Lindsay bit her lip, hesitating before expressing her fears. "Doctor, she insists that her son brought her here against her will, that he deliberately deprived her of her medications. At first I thought it might be confusion, but now, I don't know. She seems perfectly lucid." The doctor nodded gravely, observing the results of the initial tests with a somber expression. He had seen similar cases throughout his career, elderly people abandoned by families interested only in their assets, patients whose death would be convenient for certain impatient heirs. Usually, however, There was at least the pretense of care, a facade of concern. In this case, the complete absence of essential medications suggested something more sinister. Without the specific medication for her heart, she has at most a week to live, the doctor finally declared, his voice heavy with the weight of the prognosis. And that medication is extremely expensive. The silence that followed these words was dense, loaded with implications that neither dared to fully verbalize. Dorothy's fate seemed sealed, abandoned in a decaying nursing home, deprived of her vital medications, without documents or means to prove her identity, at the mercy of a system that rarely questioned the stories told by seemingly concerned relatives. Unless something extraordinary happened, Russell's cruel plan would work perfectly. "We need to do something, Doctor. We can't simply let her die," said Lindsay, determination replacing the initial helplessness in her voice. "She deserves more than this. Everyone does." Dr. Mitchell looked long at the young nurse, seeing in her the compassion and idealism that he himself had once possessed. Before years of working in precarious conditions and insufficient resources eroded his hope. For a moment, he felt a spark of that old determination rekindle in his tired chest. "We'll do what we can with what we have available," he finally responded, putting away his stethoscope with a heavy sigh. "And meanwhile, perhaps it's time to question the story we were told by this apparently devoted son." The weak, late afternoon light entered through the stained windows of the nursing home, projecting elongated shadows through the gloomy corridors. In her room, Dorothy remained unconscious, her weak and irregular breathing the only sign that life had not completely abandoned her fragile body. Her fate hung by a thin thread, now depending on the intervention of strangers who, moved by compassion and a sense of justice, decided to question the seemingly unquestionable. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Russell toasted with Brittany in an exclusive restaurant, celebrating the apparent success of his perfect plan, completely oblivious to the small spark of resistance that was beginning to form in the unlikely setting of a decaying nursing home. A spark that, fueled by the determination of a young nurse and the resilience of a lady who refused to be just another silent victim, had the potential to grow and transform into a fire that would consume all his carefully elaborated plans. "To our new life," he said, raising his glass of expensive champagne. "To justice," murmured Lindsay in the nursing home while placing a damp compress on Dorothy's forehead, "which always finds a way, even in the most unlikely places." Lindsay's small apartment was on the third floor of an old building without an elevator on the outskirts of the city. It was a modest space, with peeling paint on the walls and simple furniture, but it was clean and organized, reflecting the meticulous personality of the young nurse. The evening light entered through the only window in the living room, projecting elongated shadows on the coffee table, where Lindsay had spread various newspaper clippings and notes. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed on the worn laptop, tirelessly researching Dorothy's family. Her eyes burned after hours fixed on the screen, but the determination in her gaze did not diminish. The image of the elderly woman, fragile and abandoned in that decaying nursing home, did not leave her mind, fueling an indignation that grew with each new discovery about the respected businessman who had been Dorothy's husband. "I can't believe nobody questioned Russell's story. How can they simply accept that a perfectly lucid lady is confused just because her son said so?" Lindsay muttered to herself, massaging her aching temples. "If only I could find someone who knew the family well." Lindsay took another sip of the now cold coffee and continued her search. Finally, after almost giving up, she found a small note in an old newspaper, a photo of Dorothy's wedding decades ago, where a young maid appeared in the background. The caption mentioned, "The faithful Beatrice with the family for more than 2 decades." With renewed vigor, Lindsay expanded her search, cross-referencing data and information until finally finding an address. Without thinking twice, she wrote it down on a piece of paper and grabbed her purse. The clock on the wall marked almost midnight, but the urgency of the situation did not allow waiting until dawn. Dorothy had only a few days to live without proper medication, and every hour was precious. She trusted me when she said she wasn't confused. I can't fail her now, Lindsay decided, closing the apartment door with determination. It's our only chance to discover the truth before it's too late. The taxi dropped Lindsay off in front of a small house in the suburbs, with a well-kept garden despite the simplicity of the building. She hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door, aware of the late hour and the strangeness of her visit. But when the porch light came on and a grey-haired lady with a stern expression answered, Lindsay instantly knew she had found the right person. Beatrice, the family's former housekeeper, seemed to have aged with the same dignity and strength that had probably characterized her entire life. Her eyes, though marked by deep wrinkles, maintained a vivacity and intelligence that immediately recognized the urgency in the unknown visitor's expression. "I know it's late and must seem strange, but my name is Lindsay. I'm a nurse at Golden Rest Nursing Home, and I need to talk to you about Dorothy," Lindsay explained hastily, before the door could be closed in her face. "She's in danger, and I think you're the only person who can help her." Upon hearing Dorothy's name, Beatrice's countenance instantly transformed. A mixture of concern and alertness replaced the initial distrust, and without saying a word, she opened the door wider, inviting Lindsay in. The simple but impeccably arranged living room contained several framed photographs, and Lindsay immediately recognized a younger Dorothy in many of them, always with a gentle smile that painfully contrasted with the elderly woman's current situation. Beatrice gestured for Lindsay to sit down and, after a moment of evaluative silence, spoke with a surprisingly firm voice for someone her age. "So Russell finally did what his father always feared. I've been waiting for this visit for years, praying it would never come," said Beatrice, her eyes fixed on an old photograph where a tall, dignified-looking man, presumably Dorothy's husband, smiled beside his wife. "Tell me everything without omitting any detail. What has that wretch done to my dear Dorothy?" During the next hour, Lindsay reported in detail the situation at the nursing home, Dorothy's condition, Russell's visits, and the revelations the elderly woman had shared. With each word, Beatrice's face hardened more, a contained fury growing behind her experienced eyes. When Lindsay finished her account, mentioning the doctor's diagnosis and the little time Dorothy had without proper medication, Beatrice rose abruptly, heading to a small wooden chest in a corner of the room. With precise movements, she extracted an old key from the bottom of a modest jewelry box. Mr. Henry, Dorothy's husband, was an extraordinarily intelligent man. He knew his own son better than anyone, and knew this day might come, explained Beatrice, holding the key as if it were a sacred relic. "Days before he died, he called me privately and entrusted me with a secret. He had created a contingency plan to protect Dorothy, in case Russell one day attempted what it seems he has finally tried." Lindsay watched attentively as Beatrice revealed details that confirmed her suspicions about Russell and offered unexpected hope. According to the former housekeeper, Henry had created a second will, much more detailed and specific than the official one. This document, hidden in a secret compartment in the mansion's office, stipulated that the family fortune could only be managed by Russell if he properly cared for Dorothy. Otherwise, everything would be transferred to a foundation, with Dorothy as president and Russell completely disinherited. "Henry always said that Rich had his talent for business, but not Dorothy's heart," commented Beatrice with a sad smile of reminiscence. "He hoped he would never need to activate this plan, but he prepared everything meticulously. I have a copy of the mansion key and know the exact location of the secret compartment." With growing hope, Lindsay and Beatrice carefully planned their incursion into the mansion. Timing was crucial. Russell had mentioned he had already sold the property, but the new owners probably hadn't moved in yet. This would be their only opportunity to recover the document that could save Dorothy. As they discussed the practical details, Lindsay couldn't help but admire the strength and loyalty of the former housekeeper, who had kept that secret for so many years, always vigilant, always ready to act when necessary. "Why did Mr. Henry entrust this secret to you and not to a lawyer?" asked Lindsay, genuinely curious about this piece of the puzzle. Beatrice smiled, a smile that carried decades of untold stories and unbreakable loyalties. Her eyes shone with an intensity that transformed her wrinkled face, momentarily revealing the young woman she had been when she began working for the family. "Because I was more than a maid to them. I was a witness to their lives for 30 years. I saw Dorothy shed tears when she thought no one was looking, watched Russell grow and change, noticed every small sign that Henry recognized but pretended not to see, to avoid hurting Dorothy," she replied. "With the wisdom of someone who observes others' lives so closely, that she becomes an invisible part of it. Henry trusted me because I was the only person who knew his family as well as he did himself. The following night, the plan was put into action. The imposing mansion was partially lit, with some security guards hired by Russell patrolling the perimeter, clearly a precaution to prevent intruders until the sale was finalized. Lindsay, dressed completely in black and with her heart racing, followed Beatrice through an almost invisible side entrance, hidden by well-trimmed bushes. The old key worked perfectly in the rusty lock, and soon the two women found themselves inside the property, moving like shadows through corridors familiar to Beatrice and completely new to Lindsay. "We must be extremely quiet. Russell hired these guards for a reason. He must suspect there are documents he hasn't found yet," whispered Beatrice, guiding Lindsay through a labyrinth of luxurious rooms. "The office is at the end of this corridor, and the secret compartment is hidden behind a specific painting, a portrait of Dorothy when she was young." Each step was calculated with precision. The adrenaline amplified all sounds for Lindsay, the creaking of the floor, the distant murmur of the guards, her racing heart. Beatrice moved with surprising agility, guiding them with the familiarity of someone who knew every corner of that house. In the elegant office, Lindsay admired the shelves with leather-bound books and the heavy wooden desk. "This feels like something out of a spy movie," Lindsay whispered while Beatrice methodically examined the paintings on the walls. Beatrice soon located the portrait of young Dorothy in a light blue dress. She carefully removed it, revealing the wall. Her fingers found a small imperfection, and with a click, a panel slid open, revealing a secret compartment. "Henry built this without anyone knowing, not even the architects," explained Beatrice. However, upon checking the interior, she found only empty space. Her face paled with despair. "We're too late. Russell must have found it first." Suddenly, footsteps approached down the corridor. In panic, the two hid under the desk as the door opened. "Please don't let it be Russell," thought Lindsay, squeezing Beatrice's hand. A man's hand rested on the desk, so close that Lindsay could see every detail of his fingernails. The silhouette of a man headed directly to the exposed compartment while they remained motionless, knowing that the slightest noise would mean the end of their mission. To the complete surprise of Lindsay and Beatrice, the figure who entered the office was neither Russell nor any of the guards, but a grey-haired gentleman with an elegant posture, dressed in an impeccable suit. Anthony, the former lawyer and close friend of the family, walked directly to the empty compartment, without noticing the presence of the two women hidden under the heavy wooden desk. His countenance was grave, carrying the weight of someone executing a mission of extreme importance. "You can come out from under there. You don't need to hide from me," he said suddenly, without even turning to look in their direction. "Beatrice, I would recognize your lavender perfume anywhere, even after so many years." Beatrice slowly emerged from her hiding place, a mixture of relief and confusion on her wrinkled face. Lindsay followed hesitantly, still uncertain if they could trust this man unknown to her, but clearly familiar to the former maid. Anthony finally turned, a slight smile softening the seriousness of his expression when his eyes met Beatrice's. "Anthony, how did you know we would be here? And how did you get in without being noticed by the guards?" questioned Beatrice, nervously adjusting her coat, wrinkled from the uncomfortable position under the desk. The lawyer adjusted his glasses on his face and observed Lindsay with interest before responding. There was an almost supernatural calmness in his presence, as if nothing that happened could really surprise him. In his astute eyes, the intelligence of someone who is always several steps ahead of others was shining. "Henry was much more meticulous than Russell ever imagined," he explained, pointing to the empty compartment. "I removed the documents exactly 2 days ago, after receiving a letter programmed to be delivered, if Dorothy didn't make contact for more than a week. A security plan that Henry and I developed together, anticipating precisely the scenario that unfolded." Lindsay stepped forward, the urgency of her mission momentarily overriding the discomfort of speaking to a stranger. Her voice betrayed the anxiety and concern she had carried since deciding to help Dorothy. "So you already know what happened to Mrs. Dorothy? You know she's in a precarious nursing home without her medications, practically abandoned to die?" she asked, the words coming out in an emotional flow difficult to contain. "The doctor said she has only 1 week without proper medication, and every minute counts now." Anthony nodded gravely, extracting a cell phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. With precise gestures, he made a brief call, speaking in codes that seemed previously arranged with his interlocutor. After hanging up, he turned his attention to the two women, a new determination in his gaze. "I've already initiated all necessary legal procedures." The real will, the one Russell never found, clearly stipulates that the fortune can only be managed by him if Dorothy is well cared for, explained Anthony, his voice acquiring the professional tone he probably used in court. Otherwise, absolutely everything goes to a foundation, with Dorothy as president and Russell completely disinherited, with no right to contest. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activities. From the office, the three went directly to the nursing home, where they found Dorothy still unconscious, but under the vigilant care of Dr. Mitchell, who had done his best with the limited resources available. A private ambulance, previously called by Anthony, transported Dorothy to the best hospital in the city, where a specialized medical team was already waiting with specific medications for her fragile heart. "Henry foresaw every detail," Beatrice commented to Lindsay, as they observed from a distance Anthony talking with doctors and nurses in the hospital corridor. He knew Russell would eventually try something like this, and prepared meticulously, protecting Dorothy even after his death. The dawn of the following day found Russell still asleep in his luxurious penthouse, Brittany by his side. The dream of a life of unlimited opulence, fueled by the newly acquired fortune and the illegal sale of the mansion, filled his thoughts even during sleep. His abrupt awakening came with the unmistakable sound of powerful engines breaking the morning silence. Intrigued and slightly irritated by the interruption, he got up and walked to the large window that offered a privileged view of the building's entrance. "But what the hell is happening down there?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes to make sure he wasn't still dreaming. What he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. 3 identical black cars, gleaming and imposing, were parking at that moment in front of the building. These weren't ordinary vehicles. They were high-luxury executive sedans, the type of car used by authorities or very high-ranking executives. They stopped in perfect sequence, creating an intimidating image that seemed taken from a movie about the mafia or federal agents. For a few seconds, nothing happened, as if the moment was suspended in time, increasing the tension that was already tightening Russell's chest. "Who are these people? What do they want here so early?" asked Brittany, approaching the window sleepily and immediately awake upon seeing the unusual scene. Before Russell could respond, the door of the first car opened slowly. To his growing horror, from it emerged the familiar figure of Anthony, impeccably dressed in a dark suit and carrying a folder, with what Russell instantly recognized as legal documents. The second car revealed 2 serious men in formal attire, court officers no doubt, carrying what appeared to be warrants and summonses. It was, however, the occupant of the third car that made Russell stagger backward, as if he had taken a physical blow. "It's not possible, it can't be," he stammered, his face rapidly paling. From the third black car emerged his mother, Dorothy, visibly stronger than when he had left her at the nursing home, although still fragile. She was elegantly dressed, receiving support from Lindsay on one side and from a man Russell recognized as a renowned private doctor on the other. There was a dignity in her posture, a renewed strength in her determined gaze that completely contradicted the image of the confused and helpless old woman he had tried to create. How did she manage? Who helped her? Russell muttered, his mind working frantically to process what he was seeing and its devastating implications. Without wasting time, he hurriedly dressed and rushed to the elevator, ignoring Brittany's confused questioning. When the doors opened on the ground floor, he stormed through the lobby like a hurricane, determined to prevent the group from entering the building. Perhaps there was still time to create a convincing story, to manipulate the situation in his favor, as he had always done. "What is the meaning of this invasion? Mother, what are you doing here? You should be resting in the nursing home under medical care," Russell said loudly as soon as he opened the entrance doors, trying to project indignation and filial concern for anyone who might be watching. Anthony stepped forward, extending an official document that Russell was forced to accept. His experienced gaze showed neither triumph nor satisfaction, just the serene certainty of someone who has executed justice long enough not to feel personal pleasure in its fulfillment. "Russell, this is a court order immediately suspending the sale of the mansion, freezing all family bank accounts and initiating an investigation for fraud, document forgery, and elder abuse," the lawyer announced in a formal tone, but loud enough to be heard by the doormen and some residents who were already beginning to gather, attracted by the commotion. I suggest you cooperate fully to minimize the legal consequences of your actions. As the court officers entered the building to execute the warrant, Dorothy slowly approached her son. The meeting of their gazes was like a silent duel. On one side, shock and growing panic. On the other, deep sadness mixed with unwavering determination. For a moment, the world around seemed to silence, as if everyone present recognized the importance of that confrontation between mother and son. "You said I would die in that nursing home," Dorothy finally spoke, her voice soft but perfectly audible in the tense silence. "But your father always knew who you really were." The weeks that followed witnessed the complete transformation of circumstances. Dorothy, now recovered and receiving proper treatment in a luxurious private hospital room, was surrounded by a small team dedicated exclusively to her well-being. Color had returned to her cheeks, and although still fragile, she showed renewed vitality, fueled by justice that had finally prevailed. "Lindsay, I have no way to thank you enough for what you did for me," Dorothy said, affectionately holding the hands of the young nurse who visited her daily. "Without your courage and determination, Russell's plan would have worked perfectly." Lindsay smiled, genuinely happy to see the recovery of the elderly woman who had so deeply touched her heart. What had begun as professional indignation had transformed into a genuine connection, a bond of affection that transcended the initial relationship between nurse and patient. "I only did what any person with conscience would do, Mrs. Dorothy," she responded modestly. "You didn't deserve that cruel fate, nobody does." Dorothy adjusted herself on the pillows, a determined expression momentarily replacing the gratitude in her gaze. She had made important decisions during her recovery, and one of them directly involved the young woman who had risked so much to save her. "I'm establishing a foundation, exactly as Henry planned, to help elderly people in vulnerable situations," she announced, carefully observing Lindsay's reaction. "And I would like you to accept a leadership position in it. No one better than you, who has seen up close the suffering of the abandoned, to help transform this reality." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Russell faced the devastating consequences of his actions. Evicted from his luxury apartment, now with all assets frozen by justice, he packed the few personal possessions he had left. Brittany, predictably, had abandoned him the instant she realized there would be no more access to the promised fortune. The loneliness of the nearly empty apartment perfectly reflected the moral emptiness that had always inhabited his heart. "Mr. Russell, I have a summons for you," announced a court officer standing at the door, extending another official document. "Mandatory appearance in court next week to answer charges of fraud and elder abuse." The conclusion of the story happened on an autumn afternoon, with the golden sun bathing the silent cemetery where Henry had been buried years before. Dorothy, now wearing an elegant dark blue outfit, walked slowly among the tombstones, supported by a cane, and accompanied by Beatrice and Lindsay. In her arms she carried a bouquet of red roses, her late husband's favorites. When they reached the simple yet elegant gravestone, Dorothy gently gestured, asking for a moment of privacy that was respectfully granted. "You always said our son had your talent for business, but not my heart," she murmured, placing the flowers on the cold marble. "Now I'll use your fortune to help abandoned elderly people like I almost was." A solitary tear slid down Dorothy's wrinkled face, falling on the gravestone as the sun began its descent on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. That moment marked not just the end of a story of betrayal and redemption, but the beginning of a new journey, one in which the pain of the past would be transformed into hope for many. "Thank you for foreseeing everything, my love," whispered Dorothy, gently touching the name engraved in the stone. "Even in absence, you still managed to protect me." The setting sun cast elongated shadows across the tombstones, creating a spectacle of light and darkness that seemed to perfectly symbolize the human journey, with its moments of despair and redemption, of falls and new beginnings. Dorothy took a deep breath, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The circle was complete, justice had prevailed, and now it was time to look ahead, to the new purpose she had found amid adversity. "It's time to go," she called softly to Lindsay and Beatrice, who were waiting at a respectful distance. "We have much work ahead of us." As the three women slowly walked out of the cemetery, the last ray of sunlight briefly illuminated Henry's gravestone, like a final farewell before night fell completely. The end of a day, the beginning of a new chapter. Did you enjoy Dorothy and Lindsay's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.